Hello and welcome to another book discussion hosted by Gerakbudaya. Today I would like to talk about a particular book which during its time was regarded as a very original landmark study, and by this I'm referring to Khoo Boo Teik's Paradoxes of Mahathirism. This book first appeared in 1995, published by Oxford University Press, and has now been republished by Gerakbudaya. And it is, I believe, one of the most original works of Malaysian scholarship produced over the last few decades. It is a political biography, a microbiography of a politician, a political leader, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. And as many of us are aware, we live in a region where there have been many political biographies of political leaders and elites that have been published all over Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, many of these political biographies have tended to be works of hagiography. That is, they have tended to praise or laud the achievements of certain politicians or certain leaders without giving us a deeper understanding of the complexities of their politics or their ideological leanings or what have you. The original aspect of Khoo Boo Teik's work is that it is an intellectual biography of Mahathir Mohamad that is not only a biography but also can be read as a work of political history, a history of Malaysia in particular. The title, Paradoxes of Mahathirism, already tells us something about how he approaches the subject. And the approach taken by Khoo Boo Teik is a very academic one, where this is actually a very objective, systematic, academic assessment of both the leader and the context that gave rise to not only him but the politics that he represented. Published in 1995 when Mahathir was still in power, this is an interesting book because it in many ways attempts to explain the ideological leanings and profile of the subject, that is Dr. Mahathir himself. There are two things about this book which I find very interesting. The first is the idea put forth by the author that Mahathir Mohamad was not only a populist politician, but interestingly, Khoo Boo Teik describes him as an unpopular populist. Now, what does this mean? Now, Boo Teik tries to explain this by looking at the policies that were put forth by Mahathir, and for this, he attempts a mapping of the intellectual landscape of Dr. Mahathir, the party he led, and the country at the same time. Now, he presents Dr. Mahathir as, on the one hand, a third world, southern economic nationalist, but on the other hand, as a pro-free market capitalist. Now, this is, I think, one of the most interesting aspects about Mahathir and Mahathir's period of rule, because when compared to other post-colonial leaders from the South, if we look at the leaders that have emerged in countries like Burma or India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, from the 60s all the way to the 80s, we see more or less a similar pattern. Many of the early political leaders, the political elites of these countries were obviously, post-colonial elites. They were pro-South, they were pro-Third World, but their political and ideological leanings were more to the left. Many of them attempted to implement economic policies that were left-leaning in the sense that they believed in certain socialist ideals, including the welfare state and state intervention in the national economy. Now, the interesting thing, as Boo Teik notes in this book, is that Mahathir was one of the very few southern leaders, third world leaders, whose economic approach was more to the right. That is, he was a believer in free market principles and laissez-faire economics. Not entirely free, of course, but nonetheless a believer in the power of capital and the role that capital has to play not only in economic development, but also in nation building and nationalism. Now, this, in a sense, set Mahathir apart from many of his contemporaries and peers from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And Boo Teik does a wonderful job in this book explaining how and why Mahathir's economic policies were geared in a manner where, on the one hand, he was a champion of Southern interests. Many of us know, for instance, that he took a very firm stand on certain issues such as apartheid in South Africa, but at the same time, wanted there to be an open and a liberal economy because he believed that trade and crucially foreign investment, foreign capital would play an important role in the development of Malaysia. Now this leads us to the second interesting thing about the book, which is how the author attempts to explain how and why Mahathir's policies were, on the one hand, populist, but also made him very unpopular. His populist approach could be summed up by looking at some of the projects that he initiated, notably the National Car Project, the Proton Saga project, which was for many Malaysians at that time, when Mahathir was in power, at that time, something that was very popular among Malaysians. We need to remember that when Proton emerged, it was for a few years the most popular car in the country, because for the first time ordinary Malaysians felt that they could literally buy a piece of Malaysia. They could buy into the idea of Malaysia as a common economy for all. Now, in this respect, Mahathir is actually closer to other conservative leaders such as Margaret Thatcher, who was also his contemporary. It has to be remembered that Mahathir and Margaret Thatcher came to power more or less at the same time, in the late 70s and early 80s. And we see similarities in the approach of both Mahathir and Margaret Thatcher, who both believed that to build an economy was not enough. One had to build a sense of nationhood. But the way that they chose to do this was by creating opportunities and providing opportunity structures for ordinary citizens to literally take part in their own economy. And this would come in the case of, say, the Proton Saga project in Malaysia, and in the case of England, for instance, the privatization of national assets such as the postal service, housing, which allowed ordinary British citizens to actually buy council houses, to buy their own property. The idea was to create a property-owning democracy where citizens would feel that they are in a sense, invested in the national project. Now, of course, these policies in Malaysia were problematic at the time because what happened from the 80s and the 90s was the liberalization of the economy, which empowered certain classes and generated a new emerging urban middle class in Malaysia. Boo Teik does a wonderful job in trying to explain how economic policies such as these actually helped to alter not only the economic structures of the country, but the socio-cultural, socio-political, and socio-economic landscape of Malaysia, creating a new middle class, notably a new Bumiputra middle class that was then thought to be the bulwark, the main bastion of support for the ruling party and the ruling coalition at the time. When we read this book today, we'll see that a lot of the policies that were implemented in the 80s and 90s by Mahathir, that were populist in nature, remain, a common leitmotif in Malaysian politics until today, after successive governments that have also attempted equally populist measures and approaches in order to actually bring the nation together. But this also confirms the positioning of Malaysia as a country that has, from the 80s at least, firmly committed itself to certain forms of economic praxis and a certain approach towards capital, including international capital. It's a very important book for those who are interested in Malaysia and Malaysian studies. It's a crucial text for people who are interested in Malaysia's political economy, and it's a very good example of how to write an objective, balanced and critical political biography. So for those of you who are interested in these domains, whether it's political economy, political history, or even the genre of biographies and political biographies, Khoo Boo Teik's Paradoxes of Mahathirism is, in my opinion, one of the best examples around, and we are thankful that this book has been republished recently by Gerakbudaya and is made available again to a wider readership. Gerakbudaya is proud to announce that it is now going to start its own series of Southeast Asian studies. And with this announcement, we are also making a call, an appeal for manuscripts, looking for manuscripts that are new, that are original, and that are Southeast Asian in focus, and hopefully also academic in nature, because the aim is to create a series that will study Southeast Asia in a very academic way.